And they are absolutely what you need in the weather that we're experiencing. I mean, we're still in the middle of a heat wave, and those shorts really do breathe very nicely. Now, speaking of, I think one or two players might be able to take a breath, no pun intended, from a game last night that, despite what it looked like, some players still probably solidified their place on the roster. Of course, the cuts are coming Tuesday afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern time. That roster has to be trimmed from 90 players to 53. So last night, and of course, we know there are a couple of practices left as well, but last night was essentially maybe that final kind of audition for some players. Tough to audition against players that are first stringers, right? First time starters. So let's start right there. As far
All
as last
pro
night
ones,
goes,
NFL MVP,
yes,
defensive
the
MVPs.
Steelers literally were 24-0, almost out of the gates. I mean, literally, we
Yeah,
had a little bit of a
literally.
kerfuffle last night in getting into the game, right? And literally, Jarvis and I sit in our media seats and the Steelers score.
Yeah.
We power up our laptops, the Steelers score. We go grab our media dinner from the press box, the Steelers score. It was just
Yeah.
very, very crazy. So I start right there in saying, Jarvis, what's your opinion on the fact that Mike Tomlin chose to start his first teamers, some of whom played almost the entire game, versus essentially Arthur Smith making the decision not to play his at all?
Now, like this is one of the things that is kind of I struggle with when it comes to Arthur
Yeah.
Smith because when he first came in, he decided not to play starters at all. And I'm just like during the preseason, I was like, okay, what's that? What is that about? Like I don't understand that because that was, and then coming in the second year, he was like essentially admitted that was a mistake. He probably should have. Now he's not saying that the games would have results would have turned out different. The end results
Right.
for the end of the season would have turned out differently if he had to play these guys. But he's saying there were certain things that he noticed that that was a problem, like because those guys didn't play. So I
Right.
understood that. So second year, played the starters a little bit, and I think that when you think you have a veteran team, a Marcus Mariota, at
Mhm.
quarterback or number one, like I affectionately refer to him as most of the time, you get it. You understand that, a veteran heavy team,
Yeah.
guys are, trying to get themselves together, trying to figure some things out. Like, okay, I understand that. But
Mhm.
when you're starting quarterback, like you always start with the quarterback and work your way down. Like the overarching thing for this team is that they are young. Like
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
played a lot of guys under the age of 25 last year, and it's going to ring true this year as well. So when you have a young team, I just don't understand the whole rest piece. I don't
Yeah.
get it. Like
Yeah.
for individual players,
Mhm.
Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata,
Sure.
the
Calais
Calais
Campbell, sure.
Campbell, I
Jake
get it.
Matthews, fine.
Right, I get it. Yeah, been there, done that. Like, I
Mhm.
don't need preseason for real. You know what I'm saying? Not like that. So I get it for those guys, but when you have guys like Matthew Bergeron, Drew Dahlman, even Chris Lindstrom, I would throw him out there as well because hey, he had two holding calls he had a holding call like on the first snap, offensive snap in the second game against the Cincinnati Bengals. So when you have all these these factors coming into play, going
Mhm.
into your last preseason game, I'm just like I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And then when, like you said, like that blitzkrieg that we experienced before the game, and when the game started too for the Falcons, like we were just like the Falcons, like we got hit all upside the head, and we were just taking lick by lick by lick, and then finally get our bearings together to like midway through the second quarter, and the Falcons were the exact same way. T,
Yeah.
you know
It
what
was
I'm saying?
scary.
It was just
It was
crazy.
absolutely, yeah, it was scary to watch as we're going up to the press box because we can still see things on the monitors, right? And to
Right.
see that, it was like, oh my goodness. And like you said, Arthur Smith obviously was operating with an abundance of caution. He stated that for all intents and purposes several times during the press conference when he was asked the question of what was your rationale essentially for not starting your starters. But it is difficult to make that acceptable or understandable when Mike Tomlin has a similar situation. Now, Kenny Pickett had more reps last year than
Of
Desmond
course,
Ritter had.
a
So
lot
he
more
does
reps.
have race. So he has more chemistry with George Pickens and Deontay Johnson. And yet all three of them were out there. still getting their chemistry together. Najee Harris still getting their chemistry together. So it is kind of difficult when you think about what Mike Tomlin did with guys that actually had more opportunity to establish chemistry versus what the decision was here. And on the defensive side of the ball, I agree with you. There are enough veterans on the defensive side for the Falcons where maybe you don't want to play them as much. But on the same token, that's a pretty cohesive defensive unit for the Steelers. And guess what Mike Tomlin decided to do? Other than Joey Porter Jr., pretty much everybody, Minka Fitzpatrick and the like, JJ Watt, all of them were out there playing. So that's why I think it's also difficult. And then, of course, and we don't have this knee-jerk reaction that people had when it was 24-0. We're not even focused on that. We talked about that post-game, you and I. It's not so much that we were looking at the score. We were looking more at how they got there and kind of looking at the individual pieces, which, wow, would have been interesting to see. Could there have been a couple more sacks? Could there have been a slowdown of what the Steelers did in the red zone such that, hey, you can say we saw something in the way Ryan Nielsen schemed that such that he held them to field goals 3 out of 4 times versus holding them to field goals 1 out of 4 times. So I think that's where there was some angst and some angina, right?
Yeah, T, because here's the thing. Like I've said this, and I will continue to say this. People talk about the value of preseason and how it doesn't matter. It matters like crap because at the end of the day, it's all about teaching points. Because not only for the final 53 guys, but for those guys who are on the verge of being a practice squad guy or being on the street, teaching moments. Because guess what? You got 3 practices before you have to make cuts. So that's even more saying, okay, here's what we thought you did in the game. Okay, now let's do this. And let's put it out there on the field and see how you respond. Yeah. And if you respond a certain way, if you respond the right way that you feel they need to, that might be a situation where okay, we were thinking about cutting you all outright. Now we say, okay, you got some practice squad time available. Yeah, let's bring you back on the practice squad because we know that you can grasp different concepts. Not only pick up the scheme and grasp concepts, but when you make a mistake and we give you the reason why you made that mistake, and then we have you go out there on the field and try to correct it, you actually do it and you execute. Those are type of the things that I really feel like they missed out on by not playing their starters because at the end of the day, T, that 53 is going to be your 53.
Yeah.
And once on September 10th, when it's all going to count. And you can't have guys out there seeing things for the first time because, he talked about how it was vital when they went down to Miami in those joint practices because he talked about how Vic Fangio gives them certain looks that Desmond Ritter's going to see during the regular season. So you don't think that a Pittsburgh defense with some of the best pass rushers that in the history of ever since I've been living, they had thrown some edge rushers out there that can get after your behind. You don't think that those guys going out there and getting reps against guys like that in the preseason is not going to get them ready for the regular season?
Yeah.
So it's just a lot of stuff that kind of, almost, I'm not going to say talking out both sides of the neck, but I might be intimating talking out both sides of your neck.
Yeah. Well, it will make for some interesting and intriguing practices the next couple of days as the guys who are on the fringe try to make it over the line of 53. And some of them might be some newbies. I think DeMarco Hellams probably made the case for himself to stick around. So we're going to say the guy that we both wanted to see, he did enough last night to be on this side. But who on this side of the fence, right? But who's the guy, and I'll make you laugh about this, but we'll wrap it up after that because I know we got to move on because we could really, really get down on what happened last night, guys. It was interesting. Yeah. We had to really dig inside to get ourselves past some of the debacles that almost happened. But like we said, Helms is on this side of the fence. Randy McMichael, our guy who guest hosted last week, and of course our pal from 99 Game, talked about what it feels like on that day of cuts, right? So the guys who aren't getting cut, they've already left the building, whether it's the hotel room, whether it's the compound like there is out at Flowery Branch or the like. And he says that's so good because you don't want to hear those knocks on the door. It really, is kind of a sad thing. But
Right.
I think last night somebody might have solidified their knock on the door. Who's the one guy that you felt like no matter what he does, in these next couple of practices, he probably sealed his fate last night? Who's that guy?
77. Like, it has to be. It's time. This is the third year of your going into your third year,
Sure.
third season, as a professional football player, and I haven't seen you get better.
Yeah.
I haven't. I just haven't.
Yeah.
And when you think about being thrust into, playing that left guard spot, I really felt like, hey, that was kind of messed up. And he just couldn't catch himself and recover.
Yeah.
And I really feel like he hasn't been able to ever since then, because there were a lot of people, talking about when he was drafted, like, hey, that's kind of high for this guy. And we've come to see now that, yeah, a third round pick for Jalen Mayfield.
Yeah.
That was a little bit too high. And now, and if he does remain on this roster, that will say a lot about this regime. And I will say that it will be the opposite of how I thought about them, right? Because those guys have certainly moved on from guys that they feel that, didn't work out or wasn't going to work out for them in the long term. And if they are for some reason hang on to Jalen Mayfield, I'll be very disappointed.
Yeah, I think many would be disappointed about that as well. We shall see on Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m., if not sooner than that. And of course, we'll keep you guys posted. But is there someone you guys saw last night that you said, hey, that's the guy who I think needs to be on this side of the fence that I want to see in Flowery Branch after 4 p.m. Eastern time Tuesday? And who's the guy you say, well, you know what? It's been real. It's been good because, hey, 77, we kind of saw you where we don't want to see you, which is on the ground, on your back last evening. So it might be time to go. Let us know on YouTube what you guys think by dropping a comment in the chat. And of course, don't forget to follow ATL Day Ones and download this podcast wherever else you get your podcast.